All right, should be recording now. So today we have Emerson Green joining us. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and your content?
Cool. So I've got two podcasts. One is called Counter Apologetics, and it just kind of does what it says on the label there. It's mostly just about philosophy of religion. And the other one is called Walden Pod. It's just kind of the everything else podcast. It's just it's mostly about philosophy of mind because that's my other main interest. But yeah, I started doing that a few years ago. Just started uploading it on YouTube recently. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. But I sort of got here because I went to an apologetics camp when I was 19, or rather, I was sent there because I was, questioning things, and my parents were worried about me. Yeah, I kind of started doubting around like 17, and then didn't start calling myself until I was an atheist. I didn't start calling myself an atheist until I was like 19. But I had just never been exposed to philosophy or science really. Until that point, and it was kind of like it was like 2 weeks. I think it was like 70 hours of lectures, of like packed in those 2 weeks, and I loved it. Like I had never heard of things like epistemology or anything, and I was like, there's a whole field of study just how we know stuff. That's awesome. And yeah, so I liked it right away, and I just got sucked into it. But the thing is, because I've been thinking, I guess, what you would call like philosophical thoughts that everyone has, but I just didn't realize that people did that in like an organized, coherent way. Questions about like free will and religious epistemology and questions about the Bible. Um, so I started off in like a fairly conservative Christian background. Like ministry is sort of the family business. Like my grandpa's a pastor, my uncle's a pastor, my parents have both been like in and out of full-time ministry my whole life. I was a worship leader, and I was actually in a Christian rock band for some time.
Did they scream?
No, I was not into that at the time. But oh man, I haven't thought about that in so long. But yeah, I was in a Christian rock band, and all right, gonna try not to think about that right now. But I was sent. So okay, conservative Christian background, and then my parents started getting more and more charismatic when I was like in, I guess, high school, like ninth grade, and yeah, I did not like that. I was like, that was the first time that I looked at something that was explicitly Christian, and I was just like, I don't think this is real. Like, when people started speaking in tongues, I was just like, this is gibberish. Like, this just seems obviously fake. Um, and that wasn't the first thing that I had questioned, but and I sort of got sucked into it though, because I somehow became convinced that like that these people were like closer to the truth and like closer to God and the Holy Spirit. Actually, you had Matthew Hartke on with the I can't remember his name, but it was like, yeah. Well, you and Matthew are like my two go-to like Bible guys, so I had to watch that. But I didn't realize that me and Matthew have like a very similar background. Like we were both. I think he was more part of the International House of Prayer, and I was there a couple times. But I was involved in the same kind of stuff, like the same like very charismatic, like speaking in tongues, faith healing, like 3-hour worship sessions, like constantly talking to God throughout the day in your head and stuff. So I sort of got sucked into that and started doubting, and then I was sent to this apologetics camp where I actually met my wife. So that kind of worked out. But I also became an atheist. I thought it was going to be part of my testimony. Like I thought I was already an atheist. So I kind of doubt when some apologists will say like, look, I was an atheist. And it's like, I also thought I was an atheist, but there was a moment when I realized that I actually didn't believe. Like, not a lot of non-believers I've heard have this like struck by lightning moment where it's like, now is when I started being an atheist. But I definitely had a moment like that where I got to the end of this 2-week like apologetics camp, and I realized that like my questions had not been answered, and I'd been calling myself an atheist up until that point, but at least at that point, that's where I became aware that I didn't believe. Because I really didn't hold back, because I thought if this was the truth, it's there's nothing to hide. You can really poke and prod at this, and true things seem more true when you test them and question them. They don't just seem less and less plausible the more you ask about it. So yeah, that's kind of where it started. And yeah, then I just gradually got into more like philosophy of religion type stuff, away from like the more pop level apologetics. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, that's interesting. Apologetic. You were sent to an apologetics camp. I mean, I was in circles where they'd send their kids to that too, and I'm pretty sure I know of at least one that probably was sent there because they were doubting. But it's just funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny, like in a way.
I'm extremely grateful, though. I mean, it was like an awakening for me because, like I said, I had not been exposed to philosophy or science really in any way.
Right.
And I didn't realize there was like a whole field dedicated to the kinds of things I was interested in.
Well, that's interesting because in a way, teaching you to think more critically almost undermined your faith, even though the intent was to strengthen it.
Yeah. It gave me it gave me tools basically to make things even worse for the people around me.
Yeah. No, I mean, other people have commented on that too, and that doesn't work like that for everyone. But I do think there's something to be said where, there's just the kind of faith that's just like, I trust the Bible and that's it. And then there's when you start questioning more and trying to defend it to other people. At least in my case, I would walk people through like The Reason for God by Tim Keller. Like I would actually, it wasn't like hit and run evangelism. I'd like have a beer with people and like walk people through constantly, like over time. And to me, it started to, the act of defending it like over this amount of time to different people kind of undermined it over time in a weird way. But yeah, just one comment too, I was thinking about like the lightning strike moment for atheism, because my doubts were more like miracle and Bible based. It was more of a deconversion from Christianity rather than just Christian to atheist. It was like Christian to not a Christian, agnostic sort of. And then as I was allowing myself space to think about philosophy of religion, then it kind of went to the atheism route. And I remember there was one moment I was reading a paper by J.L. Schellenberg. It was like a new logical problem of evil. And I remember at the end of it, I was like, I might be an atheist, but it wasn't quite then. I think actually it was after, I think I've said this elsewhere, but I read The Best Argument Against God by Graham Oppy and Is God the Best Explanation of Things by Felipe Leon and Josh Rasmussen, like back to back. And like at the end of the discussion between is God the best explanation of things, I was just like, I think I'm an atheist now. Like, even though I was just, because I was hearing the best of both sides and all that stuff. But
yeah, that'll do it. I mean, like that's mainly why I'm an atheist too. But you only recently became an atheist, right? You were an agnostic up until recently.
Yeah, it hasn't been that long.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, for me though, it is like sort of an explanation thing where it's like, look, God is not a good explanation of the world that we live in. Like I can give lots of lines of evidence of things that are just totally surprising on theism, and you have to come up with these really elaborate systems of trying to explain things that are just clearly surprising on your view that you would not expect to find if theism were true. And there are like comparably fewer things that go the other direction. Graham Oppy's book there of just considering theoretical virtues and like, look, naturalism is a simpler explanation of things. But
oh no, it's not. I'm just kidding.
Man, that does bother me. It's so obvious. It's just like, or even when you try to define naturalism, like, I don't know, it just seems so disingenuous to me. Like people have been using the term supernatural because people complain about that sometimes, like the natural supernatural distinction. And it's like, look, we didn't come up with these terms. Like I looked it up the other day because I was like, is this like a new term or something? It's been around for centuries and centuries. Like this distinction between supernatural and natural has been around forever. It's not like we came up with it in a plot to make naturalism seem simpler and more reasonable. Like we're using terms that theists came up with.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it seems like they're retreating away from the distinction rather than just like, oh, we've meant this all along. Like, I don't know. It just seems like backpedaling to me. Kind of like, I mean, you could argue this in any direction, but you were saying things that are surprising on theism unless you start to like kind of jump through some hoops. Like, so for example, it's like, well, squirrels go to heaven. That helps solve the problem of animal suffering, like animal afterlife. I mean, I hope, honestly, like personally, I hope, like, I know not all atheists would agree with me, but like some kind of ultimate redemptionist picture is appealing to me. But it really seems ad hoc to just be like, by the way, squirrels go to heaven.
Yeah, that's weird. No, universalism is an interesting solution to like the problem of divine hiddenness. and also to the problem of like biblical confusion and religious confusion. Like those are three huge reasons why I'm an atheist, and universalism like totally sidesteps them. I don't think it gets you out of the problem of evil though.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like if you took away those three reasons, I haven't really thought about universalism that much. Like I have to some extent. I think if I was a Christian, I'd have to be a universalist because I just think that those, not really for any biblical reason, but just because I don't see any other way out of the problem of hiddenness, for example, or biblical confusion. Yeah, biblical confusion. Did that factor into your deconversion at all?
Yeah. So I would say the major Bible issues. Well, I think at the very, I mean, some people, and this is kind of frustrating, kind of annoying to me too, is like, just because people start to question their faith because they abandoned some strict version of inerrancy, you have to ask why was that so important to their faith to begin with. So for me, I'm already naturally skeptical of miracle claims. I was not into the charismatic stuff either. I was a bearded Calvinist, without the beard, but like, which is terrible, now looking back. But so I was not into. I was very skeptical of miracle claims the whole time, and so for me, the fact that like the Bible manifests these objective kind of characteristics that set it apart from other, holy texts and like different things like that, or that there's clear prophecy pointing to Jesus in the Old Testament that's actually clear and not, vague and out of context. But those things were important. And once I realized, that stuff was kind of crumbling, then I would actually, if you just look at the resurrection, argument on its own, I think it's just weak. Unless you have it like all these pillars kind of, holding it up.
Right.
So, yeah. So anyway, yes, back to your original question. It was definitely kind of seeing that you could, I guess the way, I wouldn't have phrased it this way, but starting to realize that you can explain all this data by just appealing to human beings. That's, I don't think I would have expressed it that way, but that's what I was starting to realize is like, okay, yeah, you can have some kind of doctrine of inspiration that sidesteps all these issues, but what's the simpler explanation? That is just a product of human beings, or it's human beings plus this other thing that you don't need.
Right.
So it's kind of similar to kind of the natural, Oppie's comments on naturalism and stuff like that. But so biblical confusion. There's another book. I'm trying to remember. I'm not gonna be able to remember the name of the book, but it basically goes through. There's a term called pervasive interpretive pluralism, where basically you just, no matter what, like, in order to have, I don't know if he would, Christian Smith wrote the book, but I don't know if he would exactly like summarize it this way. But the main issue is like, even if you, however you try to systematize the Bible, it almost seems like you have to flatten other passages to kind of fit it into kind of any system. So the idea that like I could genuinely have a conversation with someone that disagreed with my theological positions, and I could truly understand why they believe what they believed by looking at the passages that they use and be like I don't agree with that, but I understand why you believe that. Like that sentiment definitely caused me to doubt, because it's like, why should I be able to understand their position and have sympathy for it? It should be clear. You know what I mean? Or it should, depending on how you view God's word. But yes, long answer to your question. Yes.
Yeah. No, it's true, because it's like, the thing that is, I think, crucial here, because unless you're a universalist, like these are consequential issues, and you don't get out of them just by being an annihilationist. Like that seems to be the favored move these days. At least that's my perception. You're just like, oh no, you don't go to hell, you just stop existing. It's like, well, then I'm missing out on an eternity of good things. So it's like the stakes are still super high. Like the stakes could not be higher.
Right.
And like, first of all, like God is inspiring a book, which is a really weird, terrible way to communicate. Like that makes as much sense as God inspiring a podcast. Like it literally is just as likely that God would inspire a podcast as he would inspire a book.
He was stooping down to that culture. You got to understand Emerson. He was condescending to their, to what they could understand.
I hate that objection, but I mean, like, it's just it never ceases to amaze me how much Christians underestimate their own God, of like his communication abilities. And like, first of all, he's omnipotent and omniscient. I think he doesn't need your help communicating, and yet for some reason he does. And second of all, it's like, he created us. He created language itself. He created the concept of communication. And it's like, well, look, he had to communicate in this way that has just caused so much confusion. And, unless you're a universalist, is sending people to hell for an eternity, or depriving them of an eternity of pleasure or whatever. You know, and it's just like, I can't accept it. Like, I can't accept that a guy who, you know, created the message, created language, created, you know, like the very notion of communication, and created us and our minds. And it's like, well, look, he had to do it this way. It's like, it's all his fault, you know, and it's not really that weird to say that it's the omnipotent guy's fault. You know, the fact that people aren't understanding him, it's not really the, you know, non-omnipotent things that he created, by the way. Like, he could have changed our brains. He could have changed the communication. Like, he could have changed the message. There's literally no excuse for this. Like, the fact that there is, you know, unless it just doesn't matter. That's why universalism works, I think, as a solution, because it's like the stakes aren't high. You know, the only reason that this argument really has any force is because things are so consequential. So, like, if you get the wrong answer, you know, like, if you interpret the Bible in the wrong way, like, just, I can't find any other way to say this. The stakes could not be higher. Like, anyway, so it just bothers me that there are, you know, Christians who are earnestly trying to understand God's revelation. You know, they're not like me, where they've just given up trying to understand it, and they're just like, it's probably not from God. Like, there are people who are earnestly trying to understand what God is trying to say, and they disagree. And I just don't see any reason to expect that on theism.
Hidden reasons.
That could, I mean, like, that's compatible with any state of affairs. Like, that sort of like, oh, there are unknown reasons. But plus, just the concept of, because you mentioned inerrancy earlier, just the idea that the Bible is like historically, scientifically, or morally inerrant, that just seems like demonstrably false. Like, you can just read the Bible. Anyway, I know I'm oversimplifying. Which is probably not making you in particular happy, since it's your area of specialty. But it just seems like, how can someone possibly claim that the Bible's morally inerrant?
I mean, speaking as a former person who tried to do that with lots of cognitive dissonance, you know, I don't know either. I mean, what I was going to say too about the attractive thing about like systems like that are sort of Calvinist is that you basically just deny that the problem is real. So you just say, like, the revelation isn't ambiguous. Like, you know, you can blame failure to kind of come to an agreement on interpretation on human sin. You can say that God's revelation nature is absolutely perfectly clear. And so basically you're just saying, like, la, 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 like, you don't, it's basically a way to just shut down everything. And so I can understand, you know, in retrospect, why that's appealing, because you all these, like, you know, complicated issues, you don't have to feel like you're backpedaling, you know, the atheist objections. You basically get to preach to them that they're wrong. You know, it kind of puts you in the driver's seat in a way, instead of having to be on the defensive. So anyway, it's just a side tangent, but
no, it's funny because it's like, well, look, the elect all understand, you know, and it's just like, if you disagree with the elect, then you're not elect. So, I mean, like, I don't understand Calvinism, so I don't know if I'm using the terms right there, but it's still just like, it's just funny because it's like, well, there's nothing surprising about, you know, the unwashed masses getting things wrong. Like, you know, we're the elect, so, like, you know, anyway, it's just a funny tactic.
Yeah, so
Calvinism is funny, though. I do like Calvinism because it just bites the bullet, where it's just like, you know, because it just kind of seems like an implication, if it's not explicitly said in Calvinism, that God is just assigning people to hell. And it's just like, yeah, that's unavoidable on any form of Christianity. I mean, like, once you really grasp, like, the extent to which your beliefs are determined by your, you know, genes and your environment, you know, the place where you were born and your peer groups and familial groups, like, you know, you're not in control of any of that stuff, you know. So, like, before we even get into a conversation about, like, libertarian free will or anything like that, it's like, you just change a few genes and I'm not an atheist. Like, you just change my environment, the time or place I'm born or something, I'm not an atheist. So it's just like, this is one of the things that I was struggling with when I was, you know, in high school. Just like, how is it not the case that God is just assigning people to hell? And then Calvinists just seem to, like, bite that bullet. And it's like I said, I think it's unavoidable for all forms of non-universalist Christianity.
Yeah.
But Calvinists are just like, yep, that is what he's doing.
Yeah. In such a way, you know, he's ultimately causally responsible for evil in such a way that he's not responsible. It's crazy. But What about Molinism, though? God just arranges everything in such a way that, the maximum amount of people will freely, accept Jesus Christ. And so he's not assigning people to hell, Emerson. Sorry, I have too much fun with this. So you kind of already laid out your biggest doubts. So you mentioned problem of biblical confusion, obviously various forms of the problem of evil. Is there anything else? Well, I guess you don't need the explanation. God's not a good explanation. Is there anything else that I just left out there?
I've actually been working on this episode for a while, where I try to outline why I'm an atheist. And there is this section where I'm just trying to outline the different, the different phenomena, the different lines of evidence that are better explained by naturalism and by theism. And biblical confusion is definitely high on that list. So is religious confusion. It's sort of the same problem, just applied to, instead of interpreting the Bible, interpreting, God's revelation generally about like what he wants you to do. Because like there are these believers in all different faiths who are earnestly trying to do what God wants. They're not resistant in any way, and they're not atheists. Like, they're believers, they're trying to do what God wants, and they're doomed on most versions of Christianity. And again, I don't see how this is possible. Like with an omnipotent, omniscient God who earnestly wants them to be in a relationship with him, and they earnestly want to be in a relationship with him, and it's not happening. We know it's not happening because they can't all be right. So again, like that's just you can't look. Just to be clear, Christians can explain this. Like, they do have these explanations for why things are this way. They're not at all plausible. Okay, but I'm saying, like, this isn't like a logically deductive argument where it's like we can prove that God doesn't exist. It's like, no, Christians can explain this line of evidence, just like they can explain all the others. But it's just not expected. It's not what you have to ask yourself, like, what would I expect the world to look like if God existed or if Christianity were true? And what I argue is that the world doesn't look anything like you'd expect it to look if Christianity were true. The Bible, the idea that the Bible is like, morally or historically or scientifically inerrant is just like ludicrous on its face. And then just the confusion of the revelation, the religious confusion generally, the divine hiddenness, because God being hidden is a sure thing on naturalism, like it's entailed by naturalism. But I would not expect God to be hidden in the way that he is hidden. If theism were true, again, they can come up with an explanation. It's just surprising. I don't think there'd be any atheists if Christianity were true. I think there might still be people, like if I'm wrong and libertarian free will really is a thing, then you might still expect people to, freely choose to reject God like Satan did. But I don't see any reason to think why would there be atheists? Why would there be people who don't believe in God's existence? Like, I reject relationship with all sorts of people. Like there are people in my personal life, people who I've met on the internet, who I have no interest in pursuing a relationship with them. I'm not in a relationship with them. But I don't think that these people don't exist. And it just doesn't make any sense to me why God would be any different. Like, why is the question of God's existence even on the table? It doesn't make any sense to me why atheists would even be a thing.
It could be much easier for people to, and I think one of the other people that I interact with on Twitter, the Apostate, wrote a blog post about this, but he was basically saying, like, why would you be an atheist if you could just basically believe in God and God just agrees with you on everything? You know what I mean? Like, it would be so much easier. Like, why just be like, no, I don't agree with any of this and bite some of the bullets, instead just be like, in a universe where it was obvious that God existed, you could just be like, God agrees with me, and everyone can just be like, no, God agrees with me. Like, that would make more sense, I guess, than just people be like, I don't even think that this deity exists to begin with. I don't know.
I mean, Satan himself is not an atheist. Like, it just doesn't make it. I don't understand how rebelliousness, because people want to talk about like non-resistant non-believers and that sort of thing. It's like, I don't think I'm non-resistant. Like, people try to, that concept, I feel like that gets misused. Like, people seem to think if you acknowledge that there are any benefits to being an atheist, like any way that your life is better, or anything that's preferable about being an atheist to being a Christian, then you're like a resistant non-believer.
Right.
Or if you're like Christopher Hitchens and you think like, well, God is always watching you. You don't have a moment of privacy. Isn't that kind of annoying? Isn't that kind of like Big Brother? Then they consider that to be, resistant non-belief. But I don't think that. I don't think that I'm resistant to the idea that Christianity is true. I just don't think it's true. But I don't think non-resistant non-believer thinks that means that you think there are literally zero like upsides to being an atheist. There are zero downsides to being a Christian. It's a silly way to interpret that. But anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought there. But
yeah, you're good.
Atheists, I think is, but there are lots of lines of evidence. I think that. I keep thinking of the Bible just because I'm on your channel right now. But just the idea that improving the Bible is trivially easy. I don't think that should be something that we'd find. It's not something I would expect to find in a world where Christianity is true. It's really easy to improve the Bible, but there, we haven't even talked about the problem of evil. But natural evil, animal suffering, that sort of thing. But let me ask you something. Are you impressed by the triumph of Christianity? Like, are you blown away at its wild successes?
Not really. I don't know everything about like topics relating to this, but it just doesn't seem to me that, there's different reasons why it might be, triumphant. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know everything about it, but just the idea that a group could kind of like start and then kind of take it. We have like Islam probably spread for different reasons, but still like, you could kind of see people pointed out like the QAnon and stuff, like how easy it was for like just this, people have these beliefs. And then like now, even in the face of like, it's totally wrong. It's like people just rationalize it and go in the spiral. Just to me, my observations about human nature, I guess, don't make it surprising. Because like once you get into a movement, and again, I'm not arguing that because you're raised in something, therefore that's why you believe it or anything like that. But just in general, social dynamics play a role in sustaining kind of group identity over time. And so like once you get it to a certain point, and maybe there are, and like I think I was listening to your podcast episode where it was one of the ones you sent me. It was the one about like the Judeo-Christian values coming from the Bible, all that stuff, which I thought was interesting. But like, okay, so there's resources within there. Like you said, you can't pick and choose. There's a lot of other stuff that goes against like Western values and stuff like that. But like, it could be the case that there were like ways to kind of use those religious texts to bring about more human flourishing, and they just had to kind of dig in and find out how those work. So it's just complicated how I think religions form and like sustain. Again, this is just based on my observation of human behavior, but it doesn't really seem that persuasive to me that, just because this religion triumphed over time and it's big, so what? Like, I just doesn't seem that convincing to me.
Yeah, it doesn't seem that convincing, and it's also not that big. Like it had a very limited spread. Like if we include literally everyone who's ever claimed to be Christian, it's still only a third of the world. It's like that's not exactly a miraculous spread. And like that's if we include Catholics and Protestants and Calvinists and Mormons, like that's how you get to that 1/3. But if you think that it's not just one big happy family, which basically none of them do, then it's not even 1/3. And it's like that just does not seem like a miraculous spread to me. I would like in a world where Christianity were true, I would expect it to be a little more widespread. And I guess I would expect the origins to look a little different. But yeah, no, I agree with you. That QAnon stuff, I've been seeing people try to wrap that into some kind of like argument against the resurrection, because you're just seeing it happen right in front of you. Like just things that are not happening, they think are happening, and things that happened, they don't think happened. And it's just like,
well, that's something I want to study more, because like just the human tendency of like, I guess I haven't read the book, but I think the book's called like When Prophecy Fails or something like that. And it's just people in like high commitment religious groups have a tendency to not let it be falsified, and to reinterpret things to keep it from being falsified. And that's the other thing it's interesting to me about, some of the New Testament stuff is just kind of the evolution of, it seems to be like the New Testament writers and Jesus are, well, at least as depicted, are saying the end of the world is nigh, like soon. And then it starts to kind of slowly be like, well, a year to him is like, or 1,000 days or whatever, 1,000 years is like a day to God. And so it's like slowly kind of evolving away from what they originally said. So like I kind of see those tendencies within Christianity. I think it's interesting. But anyway, yeah.
No, I think who wrote that? I think the co-author of that book was Leon Festinger, who I think he helped develop the concept of cognitive dissonance or something. He was like one of the first people to research that, and I think it was like a UFO cult or something. I can't remember. This is all very foggy, but yeah, cognitive dissonance is a powerful thing. I was just arguing with Philip Goff about this over email actually, and I wish I could remember the exact conversation, but he's an atheist, but he thinks that some of the experiences that people had during the beginning of Christianity, that those were I guess that those were unusual, or he's like man. See, I don't actually I don't put that much stock in the resurrection stuff or the origins of Christianity. I'm not as well versed in that as I'm sure you are, or people who are more biblically oriented than I am. It's just that stuff is just so weak to me. I don't understand how. I don't want to sound too dismissive of it, because I know that people have just written just so much ink has been spilled on the resurrection. I don't want to sound like I'm just being dismissive of it, but the bottom line is when you remove all the proper nouns, and it's just hey, there's this religious sect, their leader died. They didn't expect that to happen, but they kept on anyway. They believed he was resurrected. It's if I didn't know the proper nouns, I would say, that's interesting. And then I would move on with my day and not think about it again. The bottom line is I just don't care. I don't care what people who lived in the desert 2,000 years ago thought about their religious leader. I just don't care. It doesn't cause oh, they really believed it. Oh, they died for it. It's that's debatable that they were killed for their beliefs. But even so, it's just again, I don't want to sound dismissive, but I have to really resist just saying who cares.
Honestly, like I said before, that's why it's to me, even then as a Christian, it was a whole package. It was thinking that, that there was clear prophecy in the Old Testament that predicted it. There's all these foundational pieces. So that way, when you just get to the resurrection evidence, it made it seem less crazy to me, because I'm this is happening within a context. This is happening when there was prophecy. This is happening when there's all these 66 books written thousands of years apart, by different authors, and they all coalesce into the same message. No, they don't. But still, telling myself those things made it seem more plausible to me. And I guarantee, I think that's probably behind why once people have certain versions of conservative Christianity, that it's not everyone, but why trying to maintain conservative Christianity, versions of Christianity, against the obvious arguments against inerrancy and different things? I think behind that is kind of an anxiety that when you let that go, it's not just that it doesn't entail that it all crumbles. Nothing about inerrancy entails, inerrancy being false entails that Christianity is false. But for the people holding those positions, they're probably naturally skeptical of miracle claims. For them specifically, they need more than just these people said this stuff in these books, gospel. It has to be a total package. Or even I remember reading some of the precept stuff. I think, James N. Anderson is a precept guy at RTS. But anyway, he was I think the book, I don't know why I don't know what it was. It was something about Christianity, but he basically just explicitly says the reasons he's a Christian, or he believes in the resurrection, is because the Bible says so. And, the internal testament of the Holy Spirit, it just comes right out and says it. And then also only the Christian worldview can account for all the, so in other words, and undergirding this belief that a guy came back to life and floated into the sky is this whole network of other claims that if those claims, I guarantee, speculation, but I guarantee if he truly was maybe Christianity isn't the only worldview that can account for everything, or maybe the Bible's not inerrant, I can almost guarantee he would not be a Christian, because that's really it's not evidence for the resurrection. It's personal experience and thinking that, only my view can account for everything. So anyway.
Yeah. I have not found it in me to read presuppositionalists or listen to them. Every time I've encountered them, I'm just you know what? You're right. Have a nice day. And it's just like I know some I know some people who have like spent a lot of time arguing against them, like Ozymandias Ramses II is a friend of mine. I mean, he hasn't posted any videos on his channel for a long time, but like he made all these videos about presuppositionalism, and it's like, look, I'll leave this to there are some things that I just do not care to talk about, and like that is one of them for sure.
Yeah, the only reason I'm even somewhat interested in it is just because, I mean, I would have considered myself a moderate one for a while, but like it's just because I came from that background and I have empathy for the people that are stuck in the like kind of intellectual black hole of Calvinism. I can't help but like try to like, you know, someone leaves the 99 for the one, you know, pulls them out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. But I think you've also, I think I read it a while back, because I've known of you at least since I've got on Twitter, probably before, you know, like when I was initially on. But like I think you did you've talked about like religious experience and why you don't think that's convincing as well as a piece of evidence in general. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like your thoughts on religious experience as evidence?
Yeah, you know, I don't know. This is kind of one area where I feel like I'm in the middle of changing my mind. So maybe I try to think out loud here.
Sure.
But I used to think that religious experience, like, you know, if you wanted to put it in terms of like an argument, that it was like one of the worst arguments that you could level, where it's like, I had this experience, you know, I know how to interpret this experience, and therefore God exists. And I was just like, this is horrible. Like, you don't know why you have the experiences you have. Like, obviously, the key part there is the interpretation of the experience. You know, like you're having these, well, I don't know, whatever they are. Like in my case, it was like you're in the middle of this 2.5 hour worship service, and you like really feel the presence of the Holy Spirit. And if you've never been exposed to like charismatic worship stuff, you know, like Jesus culture stuff like that, I guess it can be really freaky and like off-putting to like see people like praying in tongues or just like doing just really weird shit like from the outside. But it really is like, you know, it's an interesting like natural phenomenon, I guess. And like I don't think that it is like indicative of anything like supernatural. But, you know, there have been like anthropologists and psychologists who have like studied those groups because they're interesting. Like William Samarin, back in the 70s or something, wrote a lot about speaking in tongues, like analyzing it linguistically and stuff. But anyway, so that would be like one experience that people might have, like speaking in tongues or having some kind of ecstatic religious experience or something like that. Or having a dream. That's pretty common. And it's like, I always just thought, like, how on earth do people find this convincing? Because they have this experience and then they think, oh, I know what caused this experience. Like, I know why I had this dream or whatever. And I always just thought that was, not persuasive. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm not saying they didn't have the experience. I'm just saying that, like, the interpretation of the experience that you had and the experience you had are separable, and like that's the rub. It's not that you're lying. It's not that the experience wasn't real. It's not that you didn't come in contact with something that is like out of the ordinary or something. But so I used to just like totally dismiss it. But I think that the reason I'm coming around a little bit is because in a religious world, like I said earlier, what would you expect the world to look like if Christianity were true? And it's like, well, you would expect people to have experiences, like direct experiences of God. But under naturalism, would you really expect that? I don't know. Like, you might expect people to have experiences out of the ordinary. Like, you might expect them to interpret those experiences religiously. But, you know, it's just religion has a quick and easy explanation. Why are they having an experience of God? Well, it's because they're having an experience of God. Like, it's something that's, it's not ad hoc. It's not weird. It's like, it's a part of the tradition. You know, like, it's just very clearly expected on their worldview. And on naturalism, like, it is a little weird that people have these experiences and then extrapolate and think that there's all this, just the way that people interpret their experiences is just a little weird, I guess, on naturalism. Like, so I think there is a little bit of an edge there where it's it is sort of expected on a religious worldview, and it is a little bit surprising on a naturalistic worldview. Now, the other thing to consider is like Oppie's simplicity case, where it's like, look, you're explaining this with more metaphysical tools, and the naturalist is explaining this with fewer metaphysical tools. Like, our model, our explanatory model is ultimately simpler, even though yours is maybe a better explanation in some sense of, in that one sense, in the sense that it's like predicted by religion. It's a little bit surprising on naturalism. Okay, well, we're still doing it with less metaphysical baggage. Like, we're still doing it in like, with a simpler ontology. So I don't know if it's just kind of a wash, but I went from thinking that it was like ridiculous, and I was just like, this is one of the worst arguments that's ever been made, to thinking like, maybe this one is just a tie. I don't know. So what do you think about that?
I mean, so originally because I've written about this a little bit too and talked about it, but my concerns, again, some of this is explained by my background, is that to me, there's a distinction between having religious experience as a piece of evidence within the larger scheme and using religious experience, basically just using that as the foundation of your faith and just being explicit about it. It's unabashedly doing so. And so, for example, like within the kind of the Reformed tradition, and it's basically like ultimately, like in some of the confessional documents, it's like, how do you know the Bible's God's word? And it'll say like, well, it's knit together in a certain way, blah blah blah. But ultimately, by the Holy Spirit bearing witness to the truth of it in your heart. And so, very like obviously, they're just saying like, ultimately, this just because like you sense the present, you hear God's voice when it's taught. So whenever that is different, that's not the same thing as saying, I have certain experiences, and I think that's a piece of evidence within the larger scheme. What they're saying is that, no, the foundation of this is basically a direct experience, and then you build from that direct experience. So with religious experience because my aim with a lot of my content is to undermine what I take to be religious fundamentalism. That's my main aim. So I don't care as much. I do care some, but I don't care as much about people just making modest claims about religious experience. Like, this is a piece of evidence in my larger scheme, but I also need to rely on objective other stuff. I don't really care about people that speak, modestly. To me, the main issue is, can religious experience ground this like incorrigible certainty in these propositions? And I think that that's stupid. Like, I would have that dismissive attitude towards that. I'm not as dismissive towards the modest claims, just because I think in general, like, I guess something like the principle of credulity makes somewhat sense. Like, if you take it that you're experiencing X, then probably you are. I mean, I don't know how I think in general, experience can be a piece of evidence in a larger scheme. I know I've repeated myself a lot of times, but yeah. So in one sense, I have a problem with it, depending on how it's used, to support the case.
Well, that's something that actually, because what it sounds like you're making the distinction between is something like Reformed epistemology and something like just, the argument from personal experience, like I was outlining. Like, because as far as I understand it, that is sort of the difference between those two things, where someone like Tyler McNabb, who defends Reformed epistemology, would say like, no, this is not just the argument from personal experience, even though it looks a lot like it. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, this is this direct knowledge of God is just a properly basic belief. So I made some episodes about Reformed epistemology, and I sort of took it as almost like obvious. Like, I barely explained why I thought that this was just like a reformulation of the argument from personal experience. But at the time, I didn't realize how contentious that was, so I almost wanted to like revisit it and try to point out that these things are just not that different in practice. But yeah, it sounds like the thing that you have a little more respect for, I think, is just like Reformed epistemology, like sort of taking on God as almost just like a properly basic belief, like just like I'm sitting in a chair right now, or like 2 = 2 or something. So like I said, I made like an hour-long episode about that, and I mentioned him earlier, Ozymandias. I talked to Ozzy about it for like a couple hours too. It's still something I'm working through, because like I said, I don't want to just assume that like I've seen something that just like no one else has thought of. So I just want to read more into like Reformed epistemology, because the short like summaries that I've heard of, like from like Tyler, for instance, he was on Inspiring Christianities or Inspiring Christendom. I don't know what he goes by on his YouTube these days, but he was on Salem's YouTube channel, and I asked him like in the chat, like, how is this different from the argument for personal experience, where you have some experience and you just say like, this is evidence for like the way I was framing it earlier, like this piece of evidence is like better explained by my worldview. And it is, it is technically different, but at the end of the day, it just seems like the same kind of thing. You know what I mean? Where it's like you're having this experience, and you're interpreting it a certain way, and you're acting like you're not making that interpretation. But like I said, this is very half-baked and still.
Yeah, one of the mistakes that I made, again, partially because of my background, was like, so depending on how one conceives of Reformed epistemology, because I talk with Randall Rouser sometimes, like on Twitter, and so I think he would broadly, accept Reformed epistemology, but he also does things like criticize William Lane Craig for going too far. Like I remember there was a blog post where there's like a video of Craig basically like giving advice for people who are doubting, and basically like I'm trying to think of the words that I'm like. Okay, so Craig was basically speaking like religious belief is like ultima facie justified rather than just like prima facie justified. So like Rouser was drawing out the distinction between like, at least on his conception of Reformed epistemology, like, you have a prima facie justification based on experience. Whereas like Craig is basically saying like, no, like there's literally nothing that could overturn this witness of the Holy Spirit. So, and again, I haven't read all of the Reformed epistemology stuff, so I don't want to speak on everything, but I know at least people like Rouser, I think, have the way they talk about it, it's not as like that it could be defeated, like it could be undermined. Like they at least talk about it as if there could be evidence that could undermine it. Whereas like someone like Craig usually doesn't talk about it like that at all. It's usually just like, no, like basically like, oh, the evidence seems like it's against Christianity. Well, that's because you're in a historically contingent circumstance. And so just buckle down, buckle down, buddy.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't know.
It's such a funny clip. I love that clip where he's just like, yeah, basically I don't care. Like if the evidence all turned against Christianity, I'd still be a Christian because the reason I'm a Christian is because the witness of the Holy Spirit in my heart. I always laugh at that part. I've seen that clip like 100 times. It makes me laugh every time. But
that's why I was like, I didn't, when I was coming out, because I had a little anger phase, as I deconverted as well. So I was kind of like bull in the china shop a little bit. And so, I kind of was a little more aggressive with some people that held to a broadly Reformed epistemology than I probably should have been, just because I didn't know all the nuances of how people would express it and stuff like that. But that's definitely, I've read some Plantinga, not all. That's something else that I need to read more about for sure. But
Craig loves Plantinga. Craig's a big Plantinga fan, and it's like, we can move on. I haven't, like I said, I've been thinking about religious experience, but I want to go back and revisit Reformed epistemology for sure sometime.
Yeah. This is kind of off topic, but not exactly, but there was a tweet that you had tweeted, I don't know how long ago, maybe a month ago, that I really liked. It's kind of had to do with like this obsession against the new atheism, when in reality, like fundamentalism is like much bigger and much more dangerous. Do you want to kind of talk about your thoughts about that? I think we're going to be in agreement, but I thought that was a really interesting tweet.
So I think that a lot of people criticize the new atheists for things that, make sense. Like the new atheists were not, they in my view, they did not attempt to contribute to like analytic philosophy of religion. Mm-hmm. Okay. But some people seem to think that that's what they should have done. And the fact that they didn't do it means that they're stupid or something. And it's just like, I don't know, if you're reading a book written by a journalist called, Why Religion Poisons Everything, and you are expecting like a contribution to philosophy of religion, that's on you. Like you're just confused about where you are and what's happening and what's going on around you, because that's clearly not an attempt to contribute to like, philosophy of religion, like in the way that like, Graham Oppy does. So I don't like a lot of criticisms of new atheists, but that doesn't mean that the things they say aren't true. So like Christians and atheists, like, if you look at the real atheology guys, they're like very critical of new atheists, and like everything they say is true. But I just don't like the constant beating up on the new atheists, because for one, I think that it misses the fact that they were primarily a social and cultural and political reaction against religion, especially religious fundamentalism.
Right.
So, like I said, social, political, cultural, that was kind of their realm. Okay. And from what I understand, things were different before New Atheism was around. Like, it was just so much more acceptable to beat up on atheists and to be like just openly bigoted towards atheists. Like George H.W. Bush said that like atheists aren't Americans, and he suffered no consequences for that. Like no, he felt no pressure. He didn't have to, you know. And it's just like I remember a friend of mine said that he used to say that he was an atheist in the 90s to open gasps in the room. Okay, so like that's never happened to me.
Right.
So I can't help but think that things are different, and they kind of accomplished what they set out to do. But they didn't contribute to the analytic philosophy of religion. So a lot of people like to beat up on them for that. And so I think it's kind of wrongheaded, and it's kind of exhausting, and it's I think that it ignores the fact, because they're treated like, oh, that's like the atheist fundamentalists, as if that is a thing that makes sense. But they're just like, the constant focus on the new atheists is ludicrous for more than the reasons I've just said. It's because they're just not that harmful. Like, it just doesn't really matter that the new atheists get like some things wrong. Like, yes, it is very annoying to deal with like new atheist types who don't know that much about philosophy and seem to think that, like, you know, they don't know, and they don't know that they don't know, and like, right. You know, all we can do is try to you know, bring them along a little bit, you know. And it can happen, because I was that way too, you know, like it can happen. But my point, like you said in that tweet, I was just pointing out that religious fundamentalism is a little different from quote unquote atheist fundamentalism, where they're like, Christian fundamentalists are more numerous, for one, their beliefs are more harmful, and like they have more institutional support. So it's just like this like laser focus on like what Richard Dawkins gets wrong about philosophy, and acting like this is, it's like, dude, half of the Christians in the US think the earth is 6,000 years old, and you're getting mad at Richard Dawkins for not giving a charitable reading of the ontological argument. Like, it's so imbalanced, where it's just like the crimes of new atheists and the crimes of like religious fundamentalists are not even close. Right. They're not even in the same universe, but like there's this like hyper focus like on the atheist side and on the Christian side about like what new atheists did wrong. And I just think not enough focus on, you know, the reactionary political beliefs of many Christians in the US, the majority of Christians actually, the harm that they've done to science education, you know, like the harm that they've done to children, frankly. Like, there's so much more harm coming from the crazy religious side than the crazy atheist side. So I just don't like when people act like, well, there's Christian fundamentalists and there's atheist fundamentalists. Like, no, there's a total false equivalency.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to be, you know, willing to criticize your own side, but that's the difference. Is like, you know, occasionally I'll throw a jab at atheists, like on my Twitter, or like I'll make a blog about, you know, what I wish atheists would be better about, but proportionally, I don't. It's not like half and half, because my main target again is normally religious fundamentalism, in one form or another, or what I take to be religious fundamentalism. But even though I'm, like I said, I like you have said, like it's good to, you know, show that you're willing to like acknowledge when your side gets things wrong, but that doesn't mean that there should be a 50-50 like attack. Like, it doesn't mean that, like, you know, every other, like on this tweet I'm criticizing the new atheists, and on this one I'm criticizing religious fundamentalism, and I go back and forth. Like, that doesn't make any sense when you consider the proportion of what we're talking about. So no, I think that's kind of a pet peeve of mine as well. Definitely.
But also, I really hate when people are unwilling to criticize their own side. Like, I do have complaints about other atheists, and I don't really make them secret. Like, I do want to criticize my own side, and like, yeah, there are some people who, I mean, I know that Twitter is like a cesspool, but like people who I see on Twitter sometimes, it's just like, I mean, it's just like appalling, you know, and like I can understand how you could get wrapped up in just criticizing other atheists. But yeah, everyone could just stand to be more charitable to the other side, I guess. Like, you know, like Relay Theology just recently got in a bunch of trouble because they were being too charitable to theists, and people thought they were like crypto theists or something, like they're all gonna like convert and write a book or something. And it's just like, you pay a price if you're like even remotely nice or charitable to the other side, and like I hate that as well. But I don't want that to distract from the fact that Christian fundamentalists are so much more harmful and numerous than, like the most irritating new atheist types.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of your more recent ones too that I listened to is philosophy dead? So the age-old question, Emerson, is philosophy dead?
Yeah. I mean, I was just talking to Tom Jump the other day, and all we need is science. Actually, I didn't realize that, but yeah, philosophy is dead. So I did not like philosophy up until like I don't even know. I mean, I always liked philosophy, but I didn't realize that's what I liked. I thought that philosophy was just kind of like pointless navel gazing and like just making hair splitting distinctions on things that you could never know the truth about. And like I said to my uncle the other day that I liked philosophy, and he was just like, I can't. What did he say? He was like, I don't like. He's like, philosophy is fine, but you just have to recognize that that's just like your opinion or something. And I think that like
it's your opinion, man.
Yeah, it's your opinion, man. Oh, that is such a good movie. I just rewatched another Coen Brothers movie last night called Miller's Crossing, and anyway, just you reminded me of The Big Lebowski, so I had to give a shout out to Miller's Crossing. But anyway, I think that is sort of the popular perception of like philosophy and science, where science is like the facts, and then philosophy is like your opinion or something. And that's not accurate. I think that I don't know why philosophy has such a horrible reputation. I think it's ultimately because it's part of the humanities. I don't know why it took me this long to realize this, but this is like a general attitude that people have towards the humanities. Like there's this hyper emphasis on like STEM fields and stuff like that, and just thinking that the humanities are kind of useless. And I think that that's a horrible, toxic belief that is destined to just torpedo any like shred of culture that we might have had. So yeah, I hope that belief just really ends soon. But we are living in sort of a scientistic era where people think that people don't understand science. They think that it can like solve every single problem in principle. Like everything is sort of a technical problem. Like, but philosophy broadly, I think, is just the search for truth. It's just a rigorous search for truth, and it incorporates science. It's like it incorporates the empirical data that we've gathered and our best scientific theories into our search for truth. But the thing is, you can't just like follow the science or something like that. Like science can get you quite a lot. Like it tells you a lot about how the world works, but there's still a long way to go. Like even if you know a lot about science, about how the world is, like science is not really going to help you decide whether or not God exists. It just isn't. So like and the thing is, philosophy is like a normal human activity. Everyone does it. Everyone tries to figure out what's right and wrong. Everyone tries to figure out what's true or what's beautiful or how do we know what's true. Everyone does this. This is a normal human activity. And philosophy is just kind of like the sharpening of a normal human activity that everyone does. Like I think William James said that metaphysics, I think, is like an unusually obstinate insistence on being clear. I think I'm paraphrasing there, but that's sort of how I view philosophy too, where it's like, it's just a really clear, really rigorous sort of analytical look at truth and morality, what we should value and why. I mean, I have a lot to say on this topic, but if anyone's interested in hearing me defend philosophy, I made an episode about that.
Yeah, it was. I thought the acting analogy you gave was interesting, where it's like you compared. Well, I don't know if it was your analogy. I can't remember, but it was basically like, I think you were quoting someone else that compared, playing a violin to acting, where like if someone for the first time played a violin, they're going to be terrible. But like, there's some people that like could act for the first time and be coached enough to where they can have like an amazing performance. And why is that? It's because acting is really just a manifestation of stuff we normally do. And so again, kind of the connection to philosophy is we're all philosophers, as they say, in our own ways, trying to figure out the truth. And so it's just a tool to sharpen it, as you said. The other thing that I really, really agreed with was the kind of desire for more clarity and kind of like taking these big ideas and bringing them down to like another level to like being able to explain something simpler. And obviously like there's a place for, because, sometimes half the time, like I remember, like I'm reading Arguing About Gods right now, getting close to the end. I've read I read the other Oppie book, or the best argument against God. But so I'm working my way through this, and I was reading like the ontological argument stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, like, because, you know, I'm still wading into the waters of this. And so, you know, like I'm reading, I think one of the best things to do is just to read up. You know, you might not always understand every single thing you read, but you're still getting smarter as you go. But anyway, like there's a place for that. But I also think like, I wish there was more people that are really smart like that, trying harder to try to translate their ideas into something that, and so like, and it's kind of like interesting. I don't know if this is maybe why you started to do TikTok or something, because you did the little TikTok and it was like a minute, and it was like, here's the reasons I'm an atheist. And it was like very clear, like, you know, succinct, and I like that. But you know, that's one of the other reasons too. I started like on my blog. A lot of times people will notice that like maybe the body of the post will only be like 500 words, and then the footnotes, you know, like, because I'll be talking, because the reason I do that is because of like this. I really agreed with you when you were saying a lot of stuff, is like, I try to like have like, you know, here's the clear, you know, anyone can understand what I'm saying proportion. And then here's where people that actually want to go deeper can figure out, you know, the minutia, you know, the details. But no, anyway, do you want to talk about that a little bit? The need for clarity. I want to.
Yeah. I mean, philosophy does help you organize your thoughts and make things clearer. It can also do the opposite. And philosophers really need to work on their communication skills, especially in public. And like, I'm just as guilty as anyone else, where it's like, you get really into one subject to the point where you have lost your ability to communicate with normal people. Like, so I think philosophers need to make a better effort at doing public communication, because they're really clear with each other, you know, but like, you have to sort of learn all this, what seems like at first just pointless jargon. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, like, when I first started reading philosophy, like, I think David Chalmers said something about this too, where he was like, he started reading philosophy and it's just like, these people are like missing the forest for the trees, like they're adding all this pointless jargon. And then you get more into it and you're just like, oh, this is important. Like, these mm-hmm. concepts are like very complex, and these, like, you can't appreciate it if you don't know what they're doing.
Right.
But like, it is very clear and very, things are very well said, but like, you can't appreciate how well said they are until you bother to learn some of this jargon and stuff, which actually is helpful. It expands your kind of conceptual toolkit for understanding reality. Because here's the thing, man, like, here's the thing that I've learned looking into philosophy. Any thought you've had, someone else has already thought it and written 19 books about it.
Yep.
Like, so like, you know, whatever it is you're thinking about, some philosopher has written about it. And like, they will take it to a place where you never would have gone. You know, like, they'll take you farther than you could have gone on your own. You can stand on their shoulders, and then you can actually make a meaningful contribution to things instead of just kind of reinventing the wheel, you know, which is what you're going to do if you don't read philosophy. But yeah, the philosophers need to work on their public communication. There aren't really philosophy communicators like there are science communicators, mm-hmm. and that is the fault of philosophers. So there are some people who are trying to get out there more, like Philip Goff, who I mentioned. Like, he's making a very deliberate effort to go out and try to communicate philosophy of mind to just a general audience. And I really wish more philosophers would do that, but unfortunately, a lot of them seem to not share the attitude of like Socrates, who, you know, did philosophy among people, mm-hmm. and they sort of seem to think it's like below them to talk to normal people, or if people like can't understand them, they like blame the people. You know, it's look, I'm just saying, I was one of those people. Like, I found it in that philosophy episode. I referenced this note that I had in my phone, mm-hmm. from like 2018, where it was like philosophy's greatest hits, and it was just like, everything is water. You know, thermostats have beliefs, like consciousness doesn't exist. That last one is still stupid, but I was listening to things. I was listening to a bunch of things that I've heard philosophers say, and I was, you know, just kind of as like a snarky way of being like, isn't this a totally pointless field?
Yeah. I was going to say, before I forget, like, I can understand why people, you know, I'm not saying, because I remember just as a joke, when I started, you know, getting into it more, and I was reading, I was reading Eric Wielenberg. I think it was like Value and Virtue and a Godless, one of his books on ethics. He's got two of them. One's more popular level. But my wife was in the room, and I was like, here, come here, let me read this to you. I took a paragraph, and it was like, you know, like, property X supervenes, you know, on blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And she's like, what are you saying? Like I was like, shh. But
Yeah.
like I can understand, like if you just go, blazing in and just start reading those terms, you're just like, what are these people talking about? But it's interesting.
Actually, can I make a recommendation based on that? Because I just got this book. I got some Amazon money for Christmas, and I got this book called The Hiddenness Argument.
Yes.
By Schellenberg, and it's sort of like, because the other one I think is called Divine Hiddenness and Human Reason.
Yes.
And that's the academic one. So he goes through this book is a great example of what I was just talking about philosophy communication, of like complicated ideas where, about how we get like so out of touch, where, because you just said, oh, X like supervenes on Y, and I'm just like, yeah, what's the problem? I'm like, oh, that's a weird word that we came up with and no one knows what that means. But yeah, and he goes through that where he's like, I gave my friends, who aren't philosophers, like that book that I was really proud of, and they would just like call me and just, frustration and agony and just be like, what are you talking about? And like, just, right. He's like, in the words they had problems with, I was just so shocked at, and it's like, yeah, we have lost touch, with everyone else. And it's just like, so he goes way out of his way to try to explain not just hiddenness, but like basic concepts in philosophy that will like, so if you're looking for like an intro to philosophy of religion, that book is actually a great place to start, because he will, especially if you're like kind of new to philosophy, because he'll get you up to speed on a lot of things in the first 3 chapters. Yeah,
I really like that book. But we've been going over a little over an hour though, but I appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation. This was fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I had fun. Thanks for having me on, man.
All right, man. Take care.